From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you in the show tonight. Dirty air, the East-West divide when it comes to EU air quality. Could it drive a new green wave? Fragile Europe, will the Angela Merkel vacuum be filled by nationalism and Eurosceptics? Scooter politics, first Donald Tusk, now a new push to get MEPs moving, and our Darren McCaffrey gives it a try. Taxing tech, the UK and EU battle over who will take a bigger piece of the profits. And Penny, for your thoughts on this soon-to-be minted Brexit coin. All right, it's time to meet our panel this evening. We have, of course, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews. Darren, which of these stories do you like?
Well, despite the fact I've just dried off from clearly my first attempt on an electric scooter, I actually think the tech tax is really interesting, not least of all because after years of talking about it here in Brussels and indecision, essentially, it does seem that Britain have taken the lead on it. And that's quite interesting, given that obviously Brexit is, 5 months away.
Exactly, question of why now. All right, we'll talk about that later. We're also joined tonight by James Crisp. He's the Brussels correspondent with The Telegraph. James, which of these stories do you like?
I'm going to go with a Brexit coin, because I think that if a government really does believe it can buy off the British people with these shiny baubles, they will have a true reckoning to pay.
Must be a nice coin. Actually.
It isn't. It's rubbish.
It isn't. All right. OK, that to be debated. And joining us also is Jeppe Kofod. He's a Danish MEP with a group of socialists and Democrats. Jeppe, which of these stories take
I'll go for the dirty air, the pollution. I think this is a severe problem in many of our cities, and I'm happy that people, citizens now, are really reacting to that and demanding that politicians, local governments, national governments take action. Yeah.
Well, that is, in fact, our top story for tonight. Let's start with that. If you're watching from Eastern Europe tonight, chances are you're breathing some of the worst quality of air on the continent. That's according to a new report from the European Environment Agency. It calls pollution an invisible killer, responsible for 500,000 premature deaths each year. And it points to a distinct East-West divide when it comes to the air you breathe. The report comes as government representatives from around the world gather at the WHO in Geneva with the aim of reducing deaths caused by air pollution. Well, let's take a closer look at that report. It says air pollution causes more than 500,000 premature deaths in 41 European countries each year by causing or aggravating diseases such as heart disease, asthma, and lung cancer. Bulgaria, Poland, and Slovakia have some of the worst air quality, but the worst of all is Macedonia. All right, this is, these numbers are staggering. You chose this as the story you're watching. The EU is claiming to be in the forefront of the fight against climate change and the environment, but these numbers don't add up.
No, that's why we need to take them much more seriously. We need to end the area of the combustion engine, our cars, our trucks, and replace them by electricity cars and also public transportation systems and also I think what you showed, other ways of transportation.
I wouldn't recommend scooters.
Well, I think scooters could be an option. But, really, I think, and I think what's going on now is that we have alternatives to have a polluting car or polluting truck in the cities. So why don't we use them? So that's what we should aim policy to do. And in the European Parliament, I'm fighting for that as well.
Is this surprising to you, this fact, that the air quality in Europe is really this bad?
No, it's not surprising to me. I mean, it's actually been a problem for quite some time. What's surprising to me is how long it's taken for people to wake up to the fact that their kids, their sons and daughters are breathing in tiny particles which go into their hearts and their lungs. And it actually makes me extremely angry. There's one thing I'd say about the report and your report. Mentioning Eastern Europe is fine, but it's actually the whole of Europe. London, the air pollution is disgusting. Brussels is also really bad. So this is happening to everyone, regardless of where they are in Europe. Now, there are some EU laws, and I don't often say this, but the EU has done some good laws, but they haven't enforced them. In fact, it's down to groups like Climate Earth, which is a very good NGO, who've actually taken governments like the British to court to actually enforce EU standards, which the EU has frankly been unable to do.
Right. Okay. Let's first get insight from Geneva, because that's where the talks are happening. Let's cross live to Dr. Maria Neira, Health and Environment Director at the WHO, and she's joining us from Geneva. Good to have you with us there. The head of the WHO called air pollution as the new tobacco. Is it?
Well, this is an analogy. What we pretend to say is that we need to go back to the time when tobacco was a public health issue and it was not really a scale up and we were not having the measures. On air pollution, we need to scale up. We need to learn from these government policies. We need to learn from all the sectors now joining forces to do something as big as it was done for tobacco. The only difference is that we don't want to wait 40 years, as it was the case for tobacco. Here, the evidence is so huge, so big that there are no excuses. We need to scale up right now. This is toxic air that is killing us. And the price is paid by our lungs, by our hearts, by our brain, and putting even at risk our cognitive development. So I think we have so many reasons why we need to change this completely.
Are we at that point of critical mass? I mean, it took a while for people to get to that critical mass to recognize when it comes to tobacco, for example. But as James was saying, this has been a big problem already. But why now? Are we at that point where it's already critical mass?
Well, it depends how do you want to qualify it. For me, it's a massive public health emergency. 7 million premature deaths occurring every year. Yesterday, we launched the report on see how this is affecting children. 600,000 children dying every year. And more importantly, 93% of the worldwide children exposed to this toxic air that is polluting their future. So we need to definitely make sure that everybody in 5 years from now, when the legal cases will start to increase, nobody will be able to say, we didn't know. We knew it, we know it, we have plenty of evidence, we have plenty of interventions, plenty of solutions, and this is the positive part. We can tackle air pollution at the same time, tackle climate change, and at the same time produce plenty of benefits for our health and for our economy.
Yeah, Dr. Neira, very, very quickly, do you think politicians are listening?
I hope so, and if not, we will make sure that it will be the case. We are creating such a movement that this is no way to go back.
All right, thank you very much. We have there Dr. Maria Neira talking to us from Geneva. She's from the WHO. Thank you. All right. So are we at that point? Is it a tipping point? Is this the point where we absolutely have to change?
I think, this is a global problem. Obviously, and as bad as things are here, I think Delhi is genuinely having a discussion about banning all private cars in the city later on this week because the pollution there is astronomically bad. I think things have kind of changed. We've seen spikes in support for green movements and green parties across Europe in the past. I think in the late 80s we had it again in the mid-noughties. But of course, stories like the 2008 crash happened and suddenly the environment slides down the scale of concerns for voters and for politicians because the economy trumps it. I think what started to happen, and we are starting to see support grow, not least of all in Germany and elsewhere for green parties, it is, first of all, actually campaigning organisations being very good at putting environmental issues at the top of the agenda, whether it's plastics in oceans or whether it's climate change or pollution. But second of all, I think people are starting to really impact it, not least of all things like climate change. You look at the wildfires over the summer in Portugal and Sweden.
Indeed,
people are starting to notice.
On this point, I just want to bring in some graphics that we have, because over the past few weeks, we've seen a green surge in different elections within the EU. Now, in local elections in Belgium, for example, the Green Party won a record 30% of the vote, leaving them runners-up overall. And in Luxembourg, they won 15% and increased their tally of MPs by 50%. In Germany, the Greens surged to second place in two major state elections. In conservative Bavaria, they doubled their vote, winning 17.5%. And most recently, they took 19.8% of the vote in Hesse. Now, we're looking at this green surge. Is this really a look at a vote because people actually care more about the environment, or is it a protest vote against, the other issues? So which is it?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, actually. I think people care more about the environment today than they did previously because of the financial crisis, economic crisis. But I also think that it reflects the reaction against the politics as usual. I mean, they've seen politics as usual. People want change, yeah, and they want to vote on somebody new that maybe haven't governed recently or ever, and therefore they vote for these parties and in kind of a wish to see something change.
James,
I mean, the thing I'd sort of say is that if there is this surge in feeling, why aren't any politicians being brave to make proper, serious decisions like just tax all new non-electric cars like they do in Denmark? You know, until there's a politician who actually says, OK, that's what we're going to do, as happens in Denmark, then I don't think we're going to see real change.
And the bizarre thing is that despite, I think, growing public concern, and despite the fact that there is a bit of a green surge, I mean, you look around the world also, there are a lot of people being elected who are standing on the complete opposite, you know, talking about reopening coal mines and talking about how the economy has to trump also green issues.
We were talking about earlier the East-West divide. I'll bring it up because this is what some are doing. They're just simply sending their dirty cars over to the east, and that is not a solution. I was just looking at 350,000, I think, of German cars that would have been banned are sent to Poland.
Yeah, but Germany,
so does that make sense?
I mean, Germany has a track record on this. Germany, for example, OK, yes, they've stopped using nuclear power. How did they make up the electricity shortfall? By buying dirty coal from Poland. So, you know, there's a hypocrisy to that. I mean, basically, if you're serious about fighting air pollution and you're serious about fighting climate change, people have to accept and get behind the idea you need massive intervention on an industrial scale, probably government, well, definitely government-led, to actually turn this around. You know, you've got to think of it like Roosevelt's New Deal on super steroids.
So is there enough political will from what industry, governments and
Well, I think take the car industry in Europe has been very reluctant on changing their production model and combustion engines, diesel engines even.
Too busy gassing monkeys.
Exactly. The gas industry is there, still very dominating. I mean, Germany wants to build a Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline and so on. You know, there are a lot of resistance against a total transition of our economy, but we need to change it. And I also think we need brave proposals like, for example, our Growth and Stability Pact that we have here in Europe. Let's change it for a more sustainability pact where we see that we measure our progress in whether it benefits the environment, climate, air, and so on for people.
All right, but what if we replace cars with scooters? Because MEPs and their staffers could be scooting their way through Brussels. Parliament announced in an email today that it will soon make electric scooters available for free for journeys between EU institution buildings around here. And if you're wondering where the inspiration may have come from, remember this. A couple of weeks ago, European Council President Donald Tusk ripped through the streets of Paris. Could the sheer exhilaration and cool factor inspire MEPs to do the same? Look at that. Isn't that cool?
Really not, no.
And Darren, you had a good try, did you?
I wouldn't say it was a good try. I definitely had a try, not least of all because I was told to. But no, it was. It is interesting, and I think it's an interesting idea. It's clearly going to cost some money. There is now a trial period about to start in the next couple of weeks, with 15 are initially going to be made available. And as you say, I had an attempt to see what it'd be like scooting between the European institutions here in Brussels, and you can probably laugh now at my attempt. Welcome to the European Union's headquarters here in Brussels. As you can see, I'm outside the Commission building here, but the problem is that many of the institutions simply are not that close together. In fact, actually, the Parliament's about a 10-15 minute walk that way. And so, in order to try and get people to move quickly and easily and safely between the buildings, and of course to use public transport, well, the Parliament came up with a new scheme, and it involves these things. Yes, electric scooters. They become somewhat of a fashion, haven't they? You know, as a good political journalist, I'm going to put this to the test. Of course, safety first with the helmet. And let's see how long, how easily, and how quickly and environmentally friendly I can get between the institutions. I'll see you at the Parliament very soon indeed. So, what do I think of them? Well, first of all, I'm absolutely soaking wet. It's a very wet day here in Brussels. That was certainly quicker. I think it's about 4-5 minutes rather than 10 or 15 minutes. So, will these things take off? I don't know, but more importantly, is it good value for us, the taxpayer?
Use of tax money. Well, it's always more ecological than a car, so I think, yeah, that could be a good idea.
Couldn't people just walk?
Of course, yeah, but walking takes more time than using this device.
Do you think it's a good idea?
No, make them walk.
Do you think it's a bit of a waste of taxpayers' money then?
Yeah, does it save time with kind of the travel time for them, I suppose. I suppose time is money, but yeah, it's a bit excessive, I'd say.
Darren, that looked fun.
It was fun, and clearly I could do with spending more time in the scooter because I was completely out of breath
So the
by the time
question
I
you
got
raised-
to the Parliament.
Yeah.
I think the big question is, I mean, who's really going to use this?
You know,
Are they
the
going to
question
use
you
it?
raised, is it a good idea? Is this
you
something
gonna
worth
use it?
exploring?
Well, I'm a bicycle guy, so I will take a bicycle, actually. So I don't want to use this. But I think, again, I think walking is nice. And I mean, you also work, I think, when you walk or you take your bicycle where you also exercise a little bit more than on a scooter.
Should taxpayers be paying for this?
No. Look, I mean, some MEPs, I believe, have chauffeured cars. Now, you obviously don't. You're a bicycle guy. So take that away from them for a start. 2, let's be honest, 15-minute walk. How often do you go to another EU institution? Yeah, because I go to the Commission every day and I don't see MEPs there that often. So this just looks like an ill-thought-out, stupid idea.
So you're talking about chauffeured cars, though. Wouldn't that be setting an example if you just go with scooters rather than chauffeured?
Take away the cars, give them the scooters.
Okay.
So that's fine. But it's mandatory.
But the thing is that the scooter has become, very fashionable at the moment, so much so that we're seeing kind of all these new companies spring up offering them. But in Paris, they're just about to ban them because actually, they do move quite quickly and you can go on the pavement. And so, it can be a bit dangerous.
On a serious note, though, it's just 15 scooters that will be tried for about 4 months. I mean, what result can you actually get from that? I mean,
well, I think it's the test
conclusion?
demand, isn't it?
No, but I think you're right. I mean, in Paris, they're getting banned, but also in San Francisco, they were banned. In Copenhagen, they were there a week and then they would take off the street again because they are just thrown all over the street. So I think, why don't we just use bicycles or walk or maybe, find other ways of transportation? And you're right, we're only going there maybe once a week. Or
in hindsight, we'll know in hindsight.
One of them costs 500 euros. They're 500 euros each.
All right,
it's not cheap.
No.
We'll look back in 4 months' time and see if it was a good idea or not. All right.
Without me. I'm not testing them again.
Now, there's a lot going on with Brexit, as you know, including the UK government's latest idea to mark the exit from the EU. Well, let's get the latest with today's Brexit brief. Planning your next summer holiday? We've got some good news for you. As the clock counts down to Brexit, the UK's Transport Secretary insists it won't lead to the grounding of flights. That, despite the fact negotiations on flights between Britain and the EU have not yet begun, and an admission from Chris Grayling that the process is not in the UK's hands. Meanwhile, there's no let-up in the pressure on Downing Street. At least 5 cabinet ministers have reportedly warned Theresa May that her Brexit deal will condemn Britain to becoming a colony of the EU. Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt is said to be among those who told the British Prime Minister that her Brexit strategy could bring down the government. But not to worry, the government has a plan to win everyone round. A commemorative 50-pence coin is to be issued to mark the UK's departure from the European Union. It'll hit British back pockets in the spring of 2019 and could instantly become a collectible for all the wrong reasons. James, you're really excited about the coin.
I would say that only a government minister would think that anyone who collects coins is in any way normal or should have any attention paid to them at all. This has to go down as one of the most pathetic things I have ever seen. 1, put on a coin, or 2, out of this flailing and tired government. I mean, honestly, look, people did not vote.
I think for a sense of balance here, it should be said that on 50-pence coins, the British government every 6 months or a year do issue new ones to mark the anniversary of the NHS or some special events. They did one for when Britain joined the European community back in the 70s. They had a special one to celebrate 25 years of membership. So it probably makes sense to commemorate Did you know
that, Darren, before this story hit the headlines? Because I didn't have a clue. I'm assuming you didn't, because you're a normal person.
Well, I like it. The funniest thing about this story is that lots of people were making jokes that in the event of a no deal, that a 50p piece may well be worth 45p, given the fall in sterling, if Britain crashes out.
There is actually a serious point that I want to make about this, because this idea that people who voted for Brexit can be bought off with a coin or a festival, blue passport, or a festival of Brexit. This is the kind of thing which stores up precisely the kind of, I want to say, resentment or anger towards politicians. I mean, people didn't vote for Brexit for these things.
It's almost dismissive.
No, they voted because they want change.
Right.
So, I want change. No, not 50p in change.
And
real
actually,
change.
just in the real world today, the Home Office have admitted that they've only registered 650 out of nearly 3.6 million EU nationals who live in the UK, who are meant to have settled status after March of next year. 650 out of 3.6 million. I think that should be a greater priority for the UK government.
Right. Absolutely. And the Commission was asked if they were planning a Brexit coin. They said no, they had no plans to do so. All right. Coming up on Raw Politics, Denmark hits back at a White House report claiming that it is a failing socialist nation. Plus, as Angela Merkel eyes the end of her political reign, we look at the impact on Europe and the opportunity for Eurosceptics. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, a day after the EU took a collective gasp as Angela Merkel announced she'll step down as party leader and she won't stand as Chancellor in 2021. And it's back to business as usual. Now, this morning, when she welcomed Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ahead of an African investment meeting, it was as if nothing had changed. But it has. Though not effective immediately, her decision ushers in a seismic power shift. The Queen of Europe has become a caretaker chancellor. As Europe prepares to lose one of its steadiest hands during these turbulent times, what does this mean for the Union and who can fill the void she'll leave behind? All right, with me in the studio to unravel what Merkel's political demise might mean is Roland Freudenstein, who's a policy director at Martens Center, European People's Party think tank. We have Jeppe Kofod, who's still with us, a Danish socialist MEP with the S&D Group, and Pauline Bock, a contributor to The New Statesman. All right, so we have one half of this couple that's propping up this integrationist vision of Europe. With one of them gone, does it put that vision in danger, do you think?
Well, first of all, she's not gone as a chancellor.
Sure.
She will be gone by December as the president of the CDU party in Germany. Now, if she plays it well, and if things come her way, someone will be at the helm of the party that she can work with. And that means that for at least another 2.5 years, Germany will be in good hands.
But then that vision has a ticking time bomb, like a clock. It's, that vision of the integrationist Europe.
I don't think so.
All right.
She's always said that she's not going to run for the 5th term as chancellor. So the fact that she won't be around in 2021 for chancellor, that has been known for some time. The question is whether something happens in the next couple of months or 2 years that will disturb her plan. Because I must say, this is one of the best managed withdrawals from power that I've seen so far.
Right.
It started in January by installing someone close to her as a Secretary General of the party. That person will become party president if things go her way. So, so far it's going smoothly.
But what about in the context of Emmanuel Macron? I mean, he's losing an important ally in Europe.
He is, yes. They've been working together for 2 years. They have a common platform. They don't agree on everything, but they are very good working partners. And I think for him, he's a bit at a crossroads because he's been working very hard with the Germans. He's sent a really strong message after his election. He hired people in his cabinet who spoke German. He really showed goodwill towards Germany. And he has asked a lot of Germany as well on Europe, on security, on the budget and the Eurozone. And he has to start again now. So there is
and that does that give an opportunity to Euroscepticism, nationalism again?
Right.
Will this be an opportunity for them?
Yeah, I think when there's a vacuum of power, of course, there's an opportunity for the extremists on either side, I would have to say. And also, it's true that the German, France, cooperation is so important for Europe. And now, now Merkel is, maybe she's still Chancellor, but everybody knows she's retiring. So I think in politics, it's the same as saying you are on the way out, and they will look for the next leader of Germany or the next power structure in Germany. And we don't see that right now. I mean, there's a big crisis in her own government, I have to say. So she has, I think, many challenges ahead of her.
All right, let me just bring this in, because French President Emmanuel Macron and outspoken Merkelphile, he praised the Chancellor's dignity and courage. But in the same breath, he also hinted at the fight for European unity, as you have brought up. He will now have to face without her. Let's take a look.
Et je vois ça comme un phénomène européen, il n'est pas simplement allemand. Les chiffres de l'extrême droite, je le rappelle, sont plus élevés en France. Je rappelle qu'en France, j'ai eu l'occasion de le dire il y a 3 jours, le parti qui a gagné les élections européennes s'appelle le Front National. Beaucoup semblent l'avoir oublié. Mais les sortants des élections européennes en France, c'est le Front National. C'est aucun autre parti. Donc ce n'est pas une découverte et ce n'est pas une nouveauté. Mais est-ce que ces gens-là ont amélioré la situation? Est-ce qu'ils ont apporté de nouvelles réponses? J'ai même cru comprendre que parfois, ils n'étaient pas souvent là. Donc ça m'inquiète, mais ça me motive. Dans le combat qui est le mien depuis le premier jour.
Yeah, it does worry him, he was saying. It worries him.
It does. Well, it does, because the National Rally, as they're called now, the National Front, as they were called before the last election, which they lost badly in the second round, has always done very well in the European elections, because there aren't that people who go to vote, and the ones who do are usually the ones who go to vote for the National Front. He's worried, of course, about the European elections. He's also worried because at home his party is not playing that well. He is not playing that well right now, because there's a lot of discontent.
But he's already trying to find new allies in Europe. I mean, that's probably that's an opportunity for him. He's trying to build this new group of sort of progressive politicians in Europe.
Well, what he's trying to do is, first of all, repeat on the European stage what he successfully did in France. Now, I think he's now at a point where he's beginning to see that l'Europe en marche ne marche pas comme en France.
Right.
That is to say, that's why he's now actually allying himself to the European liberals.
Right.
You know, they will more or less form one group in the next European Parliament, and we'll see how strong that will be. But it's certainly not going to be the strongest group in Parliament, or even the second strongest group in Parliament. So, all the forecasts indicate that it will be the third strongest if they're lucky. And just coming back to the challenge from the radical right, indeed, that's a challenge. But coming back to the German situation, frankly speaking, I cannot imagine any scenario in the next 5 or 10 years in which this AfD right-wing party even joins a government. I mean, as long as they continue their flirt with Nazism, no democratic party is going to make a coalition with them. Coalitions will be among the other parties, and it's going to be harder because of them to form majorities, but it's not going to fundamentally change the course of German politics.
Yeah, but going back to what we see with Merkel going out of power, it's interesting to see if there's anyone as strong as her, image-wise, to actually lead Europe out.
Well, just one brief
thing. Very briefly. Okay.
When she started in 2005, Europe asked Angela who?
Right. And now here we are. She's known as the Queen of Europe. All right, we'll move on to a story we're also keeping an eye on, because Denmark is fighting back today after a report from the White House. It claimed that Nordic nations have a lower standard of living than the United States. Alex Morgan in the Cube has the story for us. Alex?
Tessa, are you ready for the catchiest report title of the day? Probably not, but this one is called The Opportunity Cost of Socialism. So, not the catchiest of titles, but this is what has angered politicians, particularly in Denmark. It takes aim at Scandinavian countries, effectively claiming that the models pursued in those countries mean people are poorer than people in America. And the idea is the top White House economists who put this together are using this as a way to what they see feel like to analyse and bat off the rise in the popularity of socialist ideas, as they call them, in America. Let me take you through some of the key findings. They claim living standards are 15% lower in the Nordic nations as a result of their policies. That means per person GDP roughly $11,000 less than in America. And overall, they conclude that even the poorest in America are better off than the average person in the Nordic countries. Now, effectively, this is an attempt to, as people are saying, push against the rise in what these thinkers at least are calling socialist ideas in America. But it has taken a week, but it's angered the Prime Minister of Denmark. Let's bring you up what he has to say. Well, first of all, in a lengthy post on Facebook, he says, if we're going to have a contest between the standards in America and Denmark, bring it on, because we'll win every time. Other lawmakers calling this fake news in Denmark. Now, the Prime Minister goes on to say, we've made choices about where we spend our money, where we spend our time. We have a better work-life balance. It really goes on to defend his country. But we've also been looking at what the experts have had to say about it. Let me just bring you up a statement we've actually just had into us here. It's come from Jacob Kierkegaard, who's an economic thinker who accuses those behind this of a sloppy intellectual trick, effectively saying this report deliberately links socialist thinkers like Lenin and Marx with the systems in the Nordic nations, effectively going straight to the centre of this, saying this report is being used by Republican lawmakers as an excuse to make political points based on poor analysis of the actual countries they're talking about. So that statement given to us by Jacob Kierkegaard here in the Cube. He's not the only one who's been taking aim at the report. Paul Krugman wrote a lengthy piece in the New York Times over the weekend, really shooting this down. But he's saying here, the Danish work far fewer hours than the Americans. And it's again coming back to this idea that these are different models of society, yes, but also the way you analyse what quality of life actually means matters in all this. So, Tessa, the politicians are angry, the experts are calling it a sloppy intellectual trick, but nonetheless, the White House report claiming that socialist ideas in the Nordic nations mean people are poorer than in America.
Right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Of course, I'll have to go to you, Jeppe, being from Denmark. You were shaking your head and laughing during that entire report.
Well, first of all, it's all domestic politics in the US. But secondly, I think the serious part is that it's fake news. I mean, if you take the hard economic fact, for example, the median income in Denmark is much higher than in the US. Of course, the gap between rich and poor are much wider in the US than in Denmark. But the average person in Denmark has a far higher income, have a far better life, and productivity per working hour is higher than the US, and Denmark is still among the 10 most competitive economies in the world. That doesn't sound like a socialist state. So, you know, this is all, it's not the first time. We have seen it also previous times that the idea that you can have universal health care or universal access to schools without paying anything for it, you pay via your taxes, is something that they don't really understand in the Trump camp. But it works quite well in the Nordics, and I think if you take the standard of living or the World Happiness Index, you see the Nordic countries always topping that because people have generally a good life. It doesn't mean we don't have any problems, but compared to the US,
the White House
I think
doesn't think so. That you would wanted to add something. Robert.
Yeah, having said all this, you know, Scandinavian socialism or social democracy, if you want, has hugely changed in the last 40 years. I mean, the Scandinavian socialism or social welfare in Scandinavian countries of 2018 is not the one of 1975. And I think there has been a learning curve, and it has gone towards more individual responsibility, a less overbearing state in the economy, and more private initiative.
Right. A quick question to you. Are Danes happy?
They're normally very happy. And if you look again, have been living in the US, seeing knowing the US. I mean, they have severe problems, and really severe problems. And I think compared to Denmark or Sweden, I mean, in general, we are among the most prosperous nations in the world.
Well, there you go. There you go. Coming from a Dane. All right, so all is good up in the Nordics. All right, after the break, fighting for a bigger piece of the profit pie, the UK and Europe announced competing plans to target big tech. That's coming up. Welcome back to our politics. Now, when it comes to taxing big tech companies, the competition looks to be shaping up. While announcing the UK budget yesterday, Chancellor Philip Hammond unveiled plans to slap the likes of Google and Facebook with steep new taxes and raise 450 million euros a year for the government.
The UK has been leading attempts to deliver international corporate tax reform for the digital age. A new global agreement is the best long-term solution, but progress is painfully slow. We cannot simply talk forever. So we will now introduce We will now introduce a UK digital services tax.
All right, meanwhile, France is leading the European charge to hike taxes on big tech. President Macron even sent his finance minister to Strasbourg to put pressure on EU leaders, but the plan would require the support of all 28 EU members. The cross-channel offensive comes at a time for record profits for tech giants, and they argue higher taxes would stifle innovation and investment. Now, to discuss all these tech and tax, we have our political editor at Euronews, Sarah McCaffrey, joining us back in the studio, James Crisps, Brussels correspondent at The Telegraph, and Jennifer Baker, technology reporter from BrusselsGeek.com. All right, Jennifer, I'll start with you. Is the timing interesting for you that this is happening? You know, this is a feel-good story. It's going up against the big giants. People like this.
Well, yeah, and I think that's primarily what this is about, because it's not really going to raise a huge amount of money set in the greater context of the British budget. The timing, I mean, of course, happens as we were getting out in front, but in fact, the European Commission had already started talking about a digital tax as long ago as last year and set out some proposals in March of this year. Now, they're not exactly the same, but, you know, there may be lessons to learn for the EU from what he has proposed. I mean, things like thresholds were always going to be part of this so that smaller companies don't get caught in this net and we don't stifle innovation, which is always the big fear that tech companies trot out every time there's any sort of tax. And of course, they don't want to pay it. Who wants to pay it? What private individual, what company wants to pay more tax? But it's a political football that should be popular with consumers.
Yeah, you were saying earlier, Darren, that you think that the UK wanted to get at it first, to be the first.
Yeah, and these are tentative steps. It's interesting. I think the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility in the UK, said it was incredibly difficult to estimate, but they think possibly it might raise £400 million. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that isn't an awful lot of money. But it's more tax than these companies are paying at the moment. You look at like Amazon and Google and Facebook raising billions of pounds worth of revenue in the UK and paying mere millions in taxation. But yeah, I think it is interesting, 5 months out of Brexit, considering Europe's been grappling with this issue, as you say, for a couple of years, clearly divided on it. France wants to march off in one direction of charging this tax. For Ireland, it would be an absolute nightmare as large parts of their economy is based on it. So for the UK, in a sense, to be seen to take the lead, and a responsible lead, is clearly sending a signal to Brussels.
Yeah, or to say, you know, when we're out of the EU, we can finally do these things on our own without anyone stopping us.
Well, but it's definitely an element that once you're out of the EU, you can press ahead and get it done quicker. What's actually, I think, very interesting is what Darren was alluding to. The fact is that, you know, this is going to be difficult for Ireland. You know, EU tax law needs unanimity. So if they're going to do something here in Brussels, Ireland has to cave in. And of course, Ireland kind of owes the EU now because the EU's backed them over the Irish backstop. So, you know, solidarity doesn't come for free, and I think it's possibly time that Dublin's going to have to pay. Well, as you can see, I'm very upset about that.
Well, America thinks it's going to pay, so let's look at this from that perspective. These companies that we're talking about, they are, let's be honest, they're the big American giants, they're the GAFAs. And there is, from their perspective, this kind of zero-sum game, because there's a lot of argument that you take money from those companies to pay in tax in Europe, and the US is going, hang on, our coffers are falling, because, you know, they see that as a complete zero-sum game. And I normally say, oh, it's not one or the other, but in this case, yeah, it may very well be.
So you think it's one or the other?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a finite amount that you can tax these companies, and they will say, Google always say, we pay all the taxes we owe. It's just, where do you owe them? Right. And if the EU or the UK can claw those back to the UK or the EU, that means they will be able to claim discounts on what they owe in the US. But
I mean, just one thing about that is, what's interesting here is the advantage of being first mover as well. So Britain can send out two messages here. One message is, no, we are not going to turn ourselves into a Singapore without the sun, slash tax, all of that. We're going to do this in a responsible way, as Darren says. The other message it sends is, we can move on this, and then international standard setters, like the OECD, maybe will take notice. And that's something which makes people in Brussels kind of nervous. When Michel Barnier talks about the autonomy of our decision-making, he's actually talking about putting in safeguards to prevent Britain making regulatory decisions which would then influence and even shape EU regulation.
It almost feels like tech companies are pawns in a more political game.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, many of them are not bigger than countries, so I wouldn't feel that. I mean, I think the one country that should be concerned in all of this is Ireland, because in the event of, for example, if there was no Brexit deal, we all know that would hit Ireland almost as badly as the UK. the agri-food sector in Ireland would essentially be devastated overnight.
Right.
And to add to that, the second tenet of the Irish economy, which is based on having all these American multinational firms based there and employing people, both of those scenarios were pretty devastating.
People in each office.
This story is not over for sure. And Jennifer, you'll be keeping a close eye on this on tech. All right, let's go to tonight's raw moment, because I'm sure we've all seen buggies at airports and been tempted to hop on. Well, it seems you're not the only one. Here's Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan at the opening of the country's new airport. Take a look. It was almost a soft moment, but you see the security around.
Actually, everyone who laughed was taken into a room and quietly shot.
I feel like it's something that ended up into a motorcade. Also, he was opening an airport with no one in it, so why he needed all those bodyguards, I'm not entirely
I'm not sure need is the word here.
I mean, one thing I did notice, though,
15 seconds.
15 seconds. Well, I never realised that you had so much in common with the president of Turkey. I mean, the similarities between the scooter.
He was going faster than me, which is pretty devastating given how slow he was going in that buggy.
On that note, we'd like to thank everybody for watching Raw Politics. We'll see you again tomorrow, so do join us then. Goodbye.